Hello and welcome to Take Time. I am your host Patrick Marlette, and let's talk about amphibians. Things that are both comfortable on land and sea. And precisely today we are going to be talking about Vostok amphibians with the Vostok Amphibia that you see in front of us. And I believe I'm using the model 090913. I think that is the exact case reference for today's Vostok Amphibia. There are a slew of Vostok amphibians. These are watches that have been around for, I think, 50 years at this point. I believe the original came out in 67, but that's neither here nor there. This is a modern Vostok Amphibia review. So I've had this watch for some time now, and this is actually my fourth Vostok. When I got into collecting watches, Vostok was really appealing to me because I didn't know if... I've always been interested in timepieces, but, mechanical timepieces are very expensive, and I didn't know if I would be interested in this hobby initially. So a few years ago, I got into watches, but I bought a bunch of Vostoks. Amongst them was an Orient Mako. I thought that would be a cool transitional piece into more expensive divers, because these watches, these newer ones, cost about 60 or 70 bucks. It's a really good bargain in that regard. But I had a bunch of vintage Vostoks. And at the time, I didn't know you shouldn't wear those things in water if they weren't properly sealed and tested. So many of those didn't wind up in too great a shape. But amongst those, I had a lovely model that was modeled in the traditional styling with paddle hands and was absolutely gorgeous, absolutely stunning. And I wish I still had that watch because it was in perfect condition. That never went into water. But it was amazing, and I missed that experience. I missed having that around. So I picked up this. That original Vostok I had was very similar to this watch, except it utilized a caliber 2209. It was not automatic. It did have hand winding, however, and it was a time-only watch. But it did have a lot of the innovations that are featured in this piece, and that's what makes this watch so timeless and why it's on everyone's mind, why it has such a huge community built up around it. You know, next to Seiko's modding culture, Vostok is definitely the largest. People love picking up these watches, but it's so affordable to jump on any one of these models. And there is, going to be an outlet for you to purchase different bezels and crystals and options for your Vostok to make it even more personalized, let alone the fact that there are so many case models and dial configurations you can get stock. It's very fun and tempting for new buyers. So in today's review, I want to talk about the specifics of this particular model and whether or not I believe you should go for a vintage Vostok or a modern Vostok. And by the way, if I'm pronouncing Vostok wrong, you can correct me in the comments. I'll see it down there. But also, I'm not Russian, so I wouldn't know how it's pronounced. I had asked a Russian friend of mine ages ago if I was pronouncing that accurately. I asked her a bunch about my Russian watches. My Pulyo, I think it's a Poljat. I had a Poljat, I had a Slava, I had a bunch of Russian pieces, but I had a ton of these Vostoks. They were very fun to get into. But as you guys know with these reviews, I am going to go over the bad and then move on to the good before giving you my final verdict on the watch. Now this watch initially came in on a bracelet, and I'll show you what that is in a second. I have the box and papers and bracelet just behind us here. But the measurements of this watch are pretty interesting. It's 42 millimeters in width at its widest, excluding the crown. Then you have 49 millimeters from lug to lug. And I don't know if these are all my measurements. I don't know if that's accurate for everyone, but the steel is cut awkwardly, and that's one of the bad notes, but we'll get into that later. But that might be affecting the measurement from lug to lug end. It is 14.5 millimeters thick, so relatively thick watch, and that's because that mineral crystal is domed so highly. And then you have 22 millimeter lugs, so pretty wide, but 22 is a good standard. And the crystal's width from one end to one end and its longest is approximately 32 millimeters, so a very smaller crystal and dial face for the scale of this watch. As I mentioned, this is the ×2 0913 reference number, so the 090913. There are a ton of different models that utilize the same case design but a different dial face layout. So if you're interested in picking up this particular one, if you like it from my review, that's the reference number. This watch features a stainless steel construction, so you have stainless steel crown, stainless steel case, stainless steel bezel, and everything else in between. As I mentioned already, you have a mineral crystal on top, and then you have lume applied at the 12, 3, 6, and 9, those little dots you see. The numbers and hour markings are actually painted onto the dial unevenly, I'll add. And you have lume on the handset, and yeah, that's it for the lume, really. It's kind of underwhelming on the lume part. I'm sure there's a dial configuration with more lume if that's your thing. You don't get much of it here. Beating inside of this Amphibia is a 24-15 movement that features hand winding and an anti-shock balance system, so it's relatively resilient. Even for your $60, you're getting a pretty hardcore heavy-duty watch. It has a screw-down crown and a screw-down case back as well, and features 200 meters of water resistance. So this is a really good diver if you're just getting into mechanical watches. Now, before we move on with the review, I just want to show you the packaging because I still have it. Most of these modern Vostoks will come in one of these plastic chocolate boxes. This reminds me of like a Ferrero Rocher chocolate encasement I've seen, like one of those holiday boxes, but it's not. I don't know if they use the same company, but it's not. Paperwork with information on your watch, of course, the serial numbers and like just the date of construction, all that stuff is here. It's not in English, so you might have trouble reading it, but put that off to the side. We also have the bracelet here. You'll notice that the bracelet I've never actually worn. It's still in the wraps. I didn't get this watch for the bracelet, and this is actually the wrong bracelet. The one I ordered had a kind of brick style bracelet. It was all brushed, and it was a brick style bracelet. There were like 5 individual pieces to every single link, and it looks completely different than this. It almost looked like Belgian brick, like in a nice neighborhood you'd see on the ground. You know what I mean? Like, it's a brick style bracelet. This is not a brick style bracelet. It is some other form of bracelet. I don't even know what to call this. But this is not the bracelet I ordered my watch with. It was kind of annoying that it came this way. But, que sera, what do you do? It was so affordable and such a minor concern of mine, but it is a little annoying. Be wary of who you order your watch from when you buy a Vostok. I also didn't order this bead blasted case. I ordered the high polish case, and it came, blasted, as this one is. Satin blasted. I don't even know what you'd call that finish. But yeah, it wasn't accurate to the description I was given. And what sucks is that the person I bought it from, I bought my Vostok from eBay, by the way. The Vostok I purchased was off of eBay from a reputable seller. But again, just be wary when you're buying these. You might not get what you see in the picture. And I only say that because I bought 2 modern Vostoks, so this isn't my only experience with this. I bought them from 2 separate sellers. I'm sort of well into the eBay ecosphere, so that's usually where I put my money, plus eBay bucks. If you guys don't know what eBay bucks are, I had a bunch of that. Like, it was more than enough to buy the Vostoks I bought, and both of them came in with minor details that were different from the listing, and that was from 2 separate vendors. So maybe eBay is not the best place. If you guys have a place you buy your Vostok from, feel free to leave that in the comment section down below. Maybe I'll have a better experience there, but kind of annoying that the bracelet and the case finish were entirely different, but it wasn't too big a concern because the overall aesthetic was exactly the same as I'd expect. Now let's start with the bad. This is going to be the longer half of the video. I hate to say it, and I really do like this brand, so it's unfortunate. But these modern Vostoks, people complain about Seiko's quality control. There are some major issues here. So you have a bidirectional bezel here, and for some reason my model, one, it's hard to grip just by design, unfortunately, but my model, it's very gritty and very, very dense. I don't know how to describe it. It's as if there's sand under here, and it's stopping me from turning it comfortably. So, I'll generally leave this at the in its resting position with the red dot at the 12 o'clock because it is just such a pain to turn and operate. Like, I probably have indents in my fingers just from turning it now, but it's really hard to grip. It's really hard to operate. It's not a functional bezel, not a well-functioning bezel. It's certainly the worst in class I've seen. I'm going to be extremely critical. It's going to sound like I'm being a jerk. Bad bezel. bad bezel. You can't convince me otherwise. If I have to buy a custom bezel to get a nice bezel, that's silly. I should buy a watch stock if it's a dive watch and be able to operate the bezel easily. Not a good bezel. The next major bad note I'd like to mention is with the dial itself. I wish that the numbers and hour markings were featured with some sort of luminance instead of being painted onto the dial. And unfortunately, I don't have a macro lens equipped to this B cam, so I can't go in on fine detail here. But you can see the numbers are kind of uneven with how they were applied. That 9 has just a little too much paint on the left-hand side, causing the O to look a little off-put. Where you can see the O here is dead center. For that 6 numeral, you can see what I'm talking about with the 9. If I were to turn the 9 upside down, it would not look like the 6. And as the font choice makes those look identical, they should look identical. Also, the painting for the numbers is uneven in areas. It is not a thick enough coat of paint. It looks like someone went in and just did a once over with the white paint, and that was it. And you can see where like the stroke where there was a lot of paint on this stroke, and that it sort of just whittled away as they went through the stroke. And not to say that this is hand painted. I don't know how they do it in their factory, but it's uneven and it's really annoying. Like, I want to take it out and paint in the missing patches, and it's hard to tell here. Again, I wish I had a macro lens. That's the next purchase for the channel, I guess, but that's never been a problem I've had with other watches, and it's never been a problem I've had with other Vostoks. So why, oh why, is my painting on the numerals uneven? You can just come to expect that, I suppose. Maybe you will have this problem, maybe you won't have this problem. What everyone's resting on is the fact that this is only $60, but $60 is a brand new video game. $60 is a bunch of really good dinners, or maybe like one really fine steak dinner. And I gotta tell you, one evening of a fine experience as opposed to a lifetime of a not so great experience is a big deal for me. $60 is a lot if the quality of the product you're getting isn't up to snuff. I think this is perfect at $60 though. As we continue our review, I think this is worth $60 at most. If you're gonna spend more, don't. Not for a modern Vostok. If you can find a vintage one, and I'm gonna remark on the vintage one for a second here. The vintage piece I had, I believe it was an 80s model with a 2209 movement. It was impeccable. The loom that made up the hour markings and the paddle hands that retained their loom, it was so finely made, evenly coated. It was the bezel on that turned just fine, no issues. And that thing, again, was over 30 years old. So explain that to me, how that bezel, it had never, so far as I could tell from the seller, it could never have been, operated on or fixed, or it was never touched. It was unrestored is what I'm saying. So it was shocking that the action on that bezel, while smooth and accurate and precise, is better than this. And this was made 2017. That's crazy to me. Now, the last bad note I want to mention, the last serious bad note, the thing that needs to be mentioned. Let me just speed through the other bad notes. I'm trying to make sure this video isn't crazy in duration, but I think the hand set is too short to include the seconds hand and the minute hand. I think the hour hand is a good length, but those other hands could be much longer. Also, this dial configuration doesn't come with minute markings. I don't know why that's a thing, but it doesn't. There are models with hour marking, or minute markings rather, so if you wanted minute marks, you can get those still. But this one doesn't feature that. Minor bad note. But the major one I want to get to, I even like the crystal. The original ones had acrylic. I'd prefer this be acrylic, but it's not. So if this gets scratched or dinged, I guess there's probably a way to work out those scratches, but acrylic is much easier for most consumers to work with. The case. Last bad note. The case is cut poorly. I'm actually going to take this off of the strap to show you guys, but the case I received is cut. It's not supposed to be a symmetrical case. It's not supposed to be oddly shaped, but this one is, and it's annoying. And I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about because it's going to be easier to illustrate with the strap off the watch. And right now I'm struggling to take this off, and it is part of this last bad note in the case being cut irregularly. Okay, so this Alpha Shark Slim, not slim enough for the Vostok. And why, the reason being why, is that this case was cut extremely poorly. Now you'll notice that the case lines here, it's uneven, this shallow area where the shrouded lug is, the space between lug to lug. You'll notice that there's more steel on the top end here than there is here. And that's because the case has those cutouts uneven. You can see it's just tilted like this. Does that action? It's like this when you look at this B cam. However they did the cutouts on these lugs is inaccurate. Like whatever happened to their assembly line, whatever machine is tasked with cutting these lug holes out, it did a poor job. And unfortunately, the way it's cut, it doesn't leave enough space between the spring bar and the shroud of the lugs, so that most straps get caught in that space. It is very hard, it's very difficult to put NATO straps into this watch without removing the spring bars and manually pressing them in, which takes all of the convenience out of wearing a Zulu or NATO RAF, whatever nylon or leather option strap you have for this. That would normally slide through spring bars. Because of how mine was cut, it just doesn't allow for that, because it always tends to snag on the extra bit of metal that's right gravitating above the spring bar. And what's funny is that same cutout malfunction issue problem is on this side too. You know, it's just uneven and it's cut. I don't know if you can tell from this angle. And it's also cut poorly on the top. And I don't know if you can tell from looking at this, but do you notice how one side on the top seems shorter than the other side? Maybe it'll help if I tilt it. Do you notice how the top end of the watch here is shorter than this edge here? Yeah. It's not cut properly. You know, it's asymmetrical in design. You can kind of tell here. This side looks like it's a little bit more raised, and same here, it looks like it's a little bit more raised, while this edge is longer and this edge is longer. It just provides a very awkward look and feel to the watch whilst on the wrist. And when you're looking at it, you notice that something is always just a little off. Now I know it seems like I'm hammering Vostok pretty hard about these things. And again, I think we're going to fall back on the fact that this watch is so affordable that it's acceptable, but if that's your mindset, it's not okay. Yeah, again, for illustrative purposes, I'm just going to show you the case in its totality so that you guys can see how something is always just a little off with how it was cut, and it's a little bit of a nuisance. And I think the major issue here is a lot of people are just going to let this fly in the comment section here and on forums and on review sites. I think a lot of people are going to let the instances of these issues occurring fly because they're going to fall back on the fact that it's only $60. As I mentioned off the bat, $60 is still a good chunk of change, especially when you're looking at an item that is considered a luxury, okay? 21st century people like us, we've got a multitude of ways in which we can tell the time. A watch is a luxury, no matter how you look at it, any price point. I don't think these flaws are acceptable, even at $60, because again, I could buy a Timex for that much. I could go to Walmart and buy a G-Shock and get a much better experience than picking up one of these Vostoks. At least this one has been a disappointment. And I've had good experiences with their vintage watches. So I'm going to step into the good here. We're going to talk about some of the hallmarks that makes this an awesome watch. And then I'm going to try to convince you, the new buyers, to purchase a vintage one instead. Okay, some of the good notes. So you have a two-part case back, and this is actually pretty revolutionary when it came out, that you have a case back that is, it's got a little key that fits into either or side of the case, and it locks into a fat rubber gasket that's down there. This is a much better design than your single screw down case back, in that you have a screw down ring instead, and that ring smashes the steel that's here alongside that rubber gasket. So it is a much tighter seal. I don't think you need to worry about the 20 bar water resistance rating being true on this, the 200 meters water resistance being true on this. It will hold up as suggested because of this innovation. And that is a really awesome innovation. And it's featured in all of the Amphibias. Also, another thing I want to talk about is the crown action. A lot of people that buy these aren't aware that the wobbly crown, as they call it, is by design. They think it's a flaw with their watch. Don't. If you buy one of these, or if you've bought one of these and think it's a flaw, it's not. It's by design. It's built into the system, but it works on a pivot, and when you slightly pull out the crown, you'll notice it sort of locks, and I'll illustrate that in a second, but you'll notice it locks into the stem mechanism. It was designed this way so that you don't unintentionally work the crown off the stem and bend it, flex it, or break it, because that is a common problem with crowns and stems, how they're usually fixed to one another. This alleviates that issue. And I actually really liked this system. I wish it was implemented in other watches. Maybe they hold the patent on this and are not feeling like sharing it, but it is actually really cool. So why don't we take a look at that now, actually, while we're talking about it. So you'll notice that this thing sort of just dangles around in there. And when you pull it, I'm trying to do it where my fingers aren't in the way. When you pull it, you'll notice it sort of locks into place, and now it's not wobbly anymore. Whereas when it's recessed, it's got all the wobble in the world. And what that allows you to do is, even in this function here, when you're setting the time, you still have to pull the crown out, so it sort of locks into that mechanism, and then it allows you to turn the hands and adjust the time accordingly. So yeah, wobbly crown, not a flaw, just a function. And I really like the wobbly crown. I know a lot of people don't. It seems a little gimmicky, but I bet you that these crown and stems are going to last a lot longer than your average one. I know on my vintage pieces, it was never an issue. They still wobbled as they should, and they still functioned as they should. So very, very cool design. As a matter of fact, I'll probably leave a link to a good article talking about all of the ingenuities that were developed for this particular watch, the things that went into its design. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll leave something in the description so you guys can read up more on this, its history, if you're interested in that. Another good thing about this watch, its aesthetic is extremely cool. I mean, this is one of the coolest cushion style watches you can purchase for yourself. And the fact that it has such a rich heritage is also really interesting if you're interested in watches or brands for the heritage. This is modeled after a classic design that came out in 1967. So very, very cool stuff there. The best thing I can say about this Vostok is that you can get all those great technological advancements in an automechanical watch that's $60. Sadly, that's the best thing I can say about it. Now, I would be remiss to tell you that you should pick up this watch as opposed to its vintage counterpart. Now, while you likely won't wear those in the water ever, you shouldn't, trust me, they are much more interesting from a horological standpoint. As a collector, I would rather have something with a little bit more character, a better scale than this, better construction than this, and more life to it. You know, what made my original Vostok Amphibia so special was all of that wabi, all of that character it had developed over its years of use before it ever reached my doorstep. These modern Vostoks simply pale in comparison to their original counterparts. I would highly recommend you pick up a vintage one. Find a good source that you find reliable, maybe a forum, maybe a seller on eBay, but make sure you source a quality vintage one of these instead. If you are interested in getting one of these, not to dive with, but to wear casually and enjoy as a collector, go for a vintage one. This is only going to upset you. Or at least it's upset me. It just feels like a gimmick. It feels like an easy way to make $60 or $120 off of someone who bought one of these out of pure interest, out of pure love for the original models. It doesn't live up to my expectations, so again, I really couldn't recommend it. Now, so far as modern Vostoks are concerned, I have heard the limited edition 1967 Vostok that looks very similar to this. The one that came, it had a bracelet option, super, super cool. I'm told that is of some of the best build quality. It's an excellent reissue of their vintage 1967 watch. And if you can find one of those and they're usually very expensive, very overpriced. I would say get that if you're interested in getting a modern one, or just go with a vintage one. But the slew of modern Vostoks, unless you want to throw down $60 or buy a used one for even less and just mod it out to your heart's content, if that's your thing, if that's what you enjoy, then yeah, these modern ones are perfect for that, because again, you're not spending much, but if you enjoy, modding these out, it's a really cool thing to do. But otherwise, if you're just buying it for the watch itself, not fantastic. Ugh, that left a sour taste in my mouth. It's upsetting because, again, I started with Russian timepieces, and maybe you guys, if you collect a lot of Russian timepieces, vintage Russian watches, let me know your thoughts and experiences with vintage counterpart as opposed to the modern ones. Am I wrong here? I could be wrong. I've been wrong about things in the past. But again, these are just my opinions of this piece. I'm sure a lot of you out there have these modern ones and enjoy the heck out of them. And you know what? For $60 to get a watch that is this water resistant and this practical, as opposed to getting, what I would get would be a Seiko, maybe not the 7S movement, but if you pay a little bit more for a 4R movement, you can get turtles on the cheap, like a little over $200 now. That's what I would do. But as a good alternative to that, shave off $140 or whatever it is, I can see you really enjoying this watch. But I just wish it was better. At any rate, guys, if you enjoyed this video, if you found it informative, if I was too blunt or too honest for you, I'm sorry. But if you did enjoy it, feel free to hit that like button. It looks a little something like this. If you have friends, forums, or groups that want the truth about modern Vostok, or just want another watch collector's opinion on the brand, someone who's collected their vintage and some of their modern before, then maybe share this video with them so they can get another person's opinion. Vostok is always relevant. They still will be after this video releases. There's so many cool strap options and modding options out there for Vostok. It gets a lot of love. So for collectors, super, super cool. But yeah, if you have friends that might be interested in picking up one, send them this video first. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. We do videos like this twice a week, so if you like consuming watch content, this may be a good channel for you. Again, my name is Patrick Marlatt, and thank you for the time.